For 60 years, Everett James carried a rusty old locket, never once opening it. People around him often wondered about its mystery, but he never shared the story. Until one day, his granddaughter convinced him to finally reveal the truth. As the cafe fell silent, Everett slowly unlatched the locket, and what was inside left everyone in shock. A faded photograph and a hidden note, the last message from the woman he had once planned to marry, the love he had lost in a tragic accident decades ago. As he read her final words aloud, tears filled the room. What did the note say? And why had he kept it locked away for so long? The answer will break you. The cafe on Maple Street was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and the gentle hum of conversation made it a warm and familiar retreat for its regular visitors. Among them was Mr. Everett James, an elderly man who sat by the window every afternoon, quietly sipping his tea while staring at something in his hands. To the untrained eye, it looked like just another old piece of jewelry, a tarnished and forgotten relic from a different time. But to Everett, it was much more. The locket had never left his side in 60 years. Though rusted and worn, it held a story that had shaped his entire life. No one had ever seen what was inside. Even his own children and grandchildren, who often asked about it, had never received a proper answer. He would smile softly and say, "Some things are meant to stay locked away." But today was different. Today, something in his heart told him it was time. It was his granddaughter, Lily, who had finally convinced him. "Grandpa, don't you ever want us to know? You've carried that locket for longer than I've been alive," she said one evening as they sat in his small but cozy living room. "Maybe it's time to share the story." Everett sighed. He had spent his entire life keeping the past tucked away, safe from prying eyes. But as he looked into Lily's hopeful gaze, something inside him shifted. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps it was time to unlock the past. The next afternoon, he walked into the cafe, locket in hand, and took his usual seat by the window. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow on the table, illuminating the locket's faded edges. A few of the regular patrons had noticed the change in Everett's demeanor. They had seen him holding the locket before, but today, he wasn't just holding it, he was turning it over, rubbing his thumb against its surface, lost in thought. "Everett," came a gentle voice. It was Margaret, the kind-hearted owner of the cafe, who had known him for decades. "Are you finally going to open it?" Everett gave a soft chuckle. "I think I just might." By now, a small group had gathered around, drawn in by the quiet significance of the moment. His granddaughter sat beside him, eyes wide with anticipation. The other patrons, old friends and curious strangers alike, leaned in. With slightly trembling hands, Everett unlatched the rusted clasp. The tiny mechanism resisted at first, as if time itself had sealed it shut. But after a moment, it gave way with a soft click. As the locket fell open, a collective gasp filled the cafe. Inside, pressed carefully against the glass, was a faded photograph of a young woman with dark, wavy hair and a smile that could light up the world. Next to the picture, folded so neatly it had barely aged, was a tiny yellowed note. Everett's breath hitched as he carefully pulled out the note, his fingers shaking. He hadn't touched it in 60 years. Lily leaned closer. "Who is she, Grandpa?" Everett swallowed hard before speaking. His voice was softer than usual, almost distant, as if he were reliving a memory instead of simply telling a story. "Her name was Eleanor," he whispered. "She was everything to me." The cafe fell silent, save for the occasional clink of a coffee cup or the distant hum of traffic outside. Even those who didn't know Everett well could sense that this moment was something sacred. "We met when we were just kids," he continued. "She was the daughter of the local baker, always smelling like flour and sugar, always laughing. We were inseparable. As we grew older, that friendship turned into something deeper." His gaze dropped to the photograph, his eyes brimming with emotion. "I was going to marry her. A soft murmur spread through the crowd. Lily reached for her grandfather's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. But life had other plans, Everett said. It was the summer of 1963. I had just proposed, and she had said yes. We had our whole future ahead of us. His voice faltered, but he took a steadying breath before continuing. Then the accident happened. She was walking home from the bakery, late one evening, when a driver lost control of his car. She didn't stand a chance. A deep silence settled over the room. Even those who had only been listening in from a distance now had tears in their eyes. Everett closed his eyes for a moment, as if bracing himself against the pain that had never really faded. I didn't know how to go on without her. We were supposed to have a lifetime together, and suddenly she was gone. He unfolded the tiny note, his fingers tracing the familiar handwriting. This was the last thing she ever wrote to me. He took a breath before reading aloud, "Everett, my love, if anything ever keeps us apart, promise me you'll keep this locket close to your heart. One day, when the time is right, open it and remember that no matter where I am, my love will always find you." A tear slipped down Everett's cheek. He had kept that promise for 60 years. Lily wiped her own eyes. "Grandpa, I had no idea." Everett managed a small, bittersweet smile. "I never spoke about it because keeping it locked away felt like holding on to her. Like she was still here in some way." One of the cafe patrons, an elderly man who had known Everett for years, placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "She would have been proud of you, Everett. You've honored her memory in the most beautiful way." Everett nodded slowly, his heart feeling lighter than it had in decades. I think I kept it closed because I wasn't ready to let her go. But now, after all these years, I realize I don't have to." He turned to Lily and placed the locket in her hands. "This belongs to you now." Lily's eyes widened. "But Grandpa, I can't." "You can," he interrupted gently, "because love isn't meant to be hidden away. It's meant to be passed on, and I want you to carry this, not as a symbol of loss, but as proof that love never truly fades." Tears streamed down Lily's face as she clutched the locket close to her heart. The cafe, usually filled with the sound of chatter and laughter, was now filled with something else, an unspoken understanding, a quiet reverence for the weight of love, time, and memory. Everett sat back in his chair, exhaling a breath he felt he had been holding for 60 years. He had opened the locket, and in doing so, he had finally set himself free. That evening, as he walked home, he looked up at the sky and smiled. Somewhere, somehow, he knew Eleanor was smiling back.